So let's get into the conversation. Let's start the conversation. And for those who don't know, Dr. Smith, tell us a little bit about just your ministry journey, so we can kind of get to know how you got to where you are, because it's never easy. We know that. So
Yeah,
it's always a long journey. So
indeed.
talk a little bit about that.
Well, I'm a third generation preacher, Baptist preacher, on my paternal side. Of course, grandfather, who's with the Lord now. My father has pastored for 48 years in Macon, Georgia. Of course, a host of pastors on my maternal side as well. And so I grew up in the church, musician, camera guy, PK, where you do everything, music, usher, you name it, custodian, you name it, we did it. And of course, I was called to ministry at 13, if you can
Wow.
believe that. And I started to, at age 17, my senior in high school, came to college, and I accepted pastorate of my first church at 19, my sophomore year of college, church in Macon, Georgia, Beulah Baptist Church, and served there for 14 years before ultimately moving to Atlanta in 2004. And so I've been here at Greater Travelers Rest, the House of Hope, since January 2004. And, a multi-generational kind of context. I started here in January of 2004. Average age was about 63.6 at the time. And the mantra for most of those people was really, we shall not be moved. And so trying to navigate transition and change in that kind of context, while my predecessor was still there. He served for 47 years and retired in March of 2003. And really his goal was to make it there for 50 years. And of course, sickness necessitated he resign. And so he really never accepted resignation. He wanted to do 50 years. He really wanted to die in the pulpit. That's a whole nother sermon for another day. And so that was a challenge, to say the least, trying to navigate, both those leadership ideologies simultaneously. And but it's been almost 17 years, and God has been faithful. So we're here with a new challenge in terms of this digital space and COVID-19, but just doing all we can to make it through and just to serve the people.
Good, good. Now I want to back up a little bit as I'm listening to you speak, and you talked about how you were raised in the church and just came up in the church, and you were called at 13.
Yes.
And started preaching at 17. To me, that seems like a big weight to carry for a teenager. So how are those teen years? How did you navigate that with all the things that teens have to deal with, and then carrying this weight that you were supposed to be delivering God's word at a young age? So how was that?
It was excruciating. By the grace of God, I was also an athlete. So I was very athletic and athletically inclined and engaged in music and media. So those things gave me some outlets. So I didn't have to struggle with that call, that weight of it. My father knew I was called at an early age, but even though we really didn't discuss it per se, when my early teenage years, he wanted to kind of push that away and avoid that conversation, to give me some time to kind of find out who I was. And even when I started pastoring at 19, that was a challenge for him, because he wanted me to, of course, finish my education and all those things first and live a normal life, have a normal college experience. And but that was something that I couldn't run from. But it was a challenge. It's certainly something I don't encourage. I just think maturity needs to be there, and I think when you call that early, people don't give you an opportunity to make mistakes and be human and be a kid. And so in a lot of instances, I didn't get an opportunity to be a kid, because everybody knew I had this call on my life. And pastoring at 19 years of age as a sophomore in college was challenging, to say the least. But hey, God graced us forward, and we're still here 32 years later.
Awesome, awesome. All right, so let's talk about now. And ministry and pastorate is challenging enough, but none of us saw the pandemic coming and hitting us like it has.
Indeed.
So with maybe what your vision was at the start of 2020, for your church and your ministry, we had to suddenly pivot. So when the pandemic hit, so what are the challenges there, and how have you been able to do that successfully?
Well, one of the things that I think I was blessed with was I've always been involved in media. As a kid, I helped to operate my dad's first media ministry, setting up the cameras and the tripods for his television ministry, making cassette tapes at the time, and keeping a log book, and then subsequently, as I was in high school, I would do some of the film for some of the guys who were trying to get scholarships, putting our football film together, those types of things. So I always had a media love, and I've been professionally involved in media since 2015. Contracted through Warner Brothers. I was a part of the first faith-based talk show with Warner Brothers and helped to produce that. So I've been engaged in media for quite a while. I have had a love for media, but never really knew how that looked into the whole ministry context. So when COVID came, the challenge for me was, how do we relay and transition and continue what we have done in person in a virtual environment? And what kind of teams do we need to have in place? What types of resources do we need in place to convey what we would have been doing in-house in a digital space? And just quickly, I was able to kind of have some conversations with some of our team members, look at resources that were available that were pretty cost efficient, and then find creative ways. For example, every February we do this lecture series. Last year we did this whole piece with a conversation with, it was Friedrich Nietzsche having an argument against a debate against who was the other one person? I can't recall, but what we did once a quarter, I would have the ministers to come. We teach about a particular subject and then come have a debate on these two opposing philosophies, right, or theologies. Well, we would do that for Bible study once a quarter in 2019. And it would also give our ministers in training an opportunity to speak, or in a debate kind of format. It would give those who were part of the class an opportunity to hear all the different positions offered in a practical way. And so how do we continue to do that? How do we take that same piece, but just do it virtually? And so for a lot of people, I think we try to reinvent the wheel and come up with these great grandiose ideas of how to make it happen. But the reality is, for us, I found that not only was it more effective to do it virtually, but we were able to have more of an impact, more people able to participate. Same way you're recording the Zoom meeting, people could go back and watch it again. And so persons who are in school or who are at work, or people who work all day, have to get their children from school, who can't make it on Wednesdays to be in the building, we're able to do it virtually. And what it does also, it saves time, it saves energy, it saves some of the utility expenses from the facilities, and you're able to still do it in such a way and still have engagement. And so those types of things, we look to see, how can we continue to do that? If the women's ministry was having a forum, or if that was going to be a married couples forum for the married couples event, that was going to be the second Friday in April 2020. And now COVID has placed a challenge on that. Well, how do we still do that forum? Same context, same panelists, but just codified and do it from a virtual perspective. And we found, if we were able to get a couple hundred people in the building in person, before there was a shelter in place, now since it's a virtual space, that 200, 300 people that we were hoping to receive has now been expanded to 3,000.
Wow.
So being able to reach more people by making it more convenient. And so in a large sense, I think it's forced creativity upon us. But people, many of us get very disheveled and kind of uncomfortable because we think it's something that has to have this massive budget or massive technological genius or huge teams, when in reality, it doesn't.
Wow. And I've heard a lot of pastors say that they've been able to reach more people and people in different ways. So with that, how will it be different when we get on the other side of this? How will ministry be different? What are some of the things that we've had to do because of the pandemic that we'll continue to do after it?
Well, typically they say it takes about 6 to 8 weeks to form a new habit. And I don't want to sound pessimistic in this regard, but I think part of my challenge is so many of my colleagues want a sense of normalcy. And so everybody's waiting to get back to where we were.
Right.
I think that is severely, I think that's severely lacking. And I really, really think that it's misguided. I don't think we can really believe that people can be out of this physical space for 9 months and everything returns back to normal. Mm. I think we're going to be severely disappointed if we think we're going to go back to the same experiences with the same kind of context and same types of attitudes and mentalities, in March of 2021 that we had in February of 2020. So in that regard, I think that's the first piece. The first mental hurdle is understanding it will never be the same. The way people have given historically, people who've gotten comfortable giving online, that won't be the same. That was the time we paid our bills by going into a store. Then we became check writers. Some of you like me, I still prefer to write checks. I'm a kind of a dinosaur, and I'll talk about it in a moment. Other people pay, you can pay bills online. So how does that impact the mentality of what we're doing? And so I think it's going to be extremely misguided to think that everything's going to be normal when we get back. It won't be normal. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, how do we develop more of a hybrid approach? I think we're going to have to be more intentional about investing in both spaces. I think we're going to have to invest more in media. When I was in seminary, one of the things I learned in my Christian education class, they said that was a quote, one of the few quotes I remember from that class. But it was Christian education is the ministry that undergirds every other ministry of the church. That was probably the key line in that class. The Christian education ministry is the ministry of the church, is that ministry that undergirds every other ministry of the church. I would hazard to say now that's no longer the case. Mm. Unfortunately, many of us in seminary and theological institutions and Bible colleges, we were trained for a world that no longer exists.
Wow.
And with that being said, we can't put, if I can use this passage in this way, new wine in old wineskins. And so for me, having to reimagine, that's the word I want to use, reimagine. What does, I'm very musical, I'm a musician, right? Hopefully we can be back in worship in March or April of this year, if the numbers say the same. But what does choral singing look like? Instead of having a large mass choir with 100 people, what does that look like? What will baptisms look like in a COVID world? What offering, passing offering trays, communion, baby dedications, the fellowshipping and the touching and the intimate nature that we have in the physical space? What does that look like? So for me, it's having to realize things like data, software, your management systems. Those things have to be in place. If not, it's not going to be successful. And so I think those are some things we have to talk through and figure out.
Yeah, and what you said there, that jumps out at me. We were trained for a world that no longer exists. So we do have to really reimagine. So I like that, and I like the way that you put that there. Now, for those though who are struggling with not being able to be there, who are kind of old school and feel like they have to be in church and need that connection, especially the social interaction for that church provides. How are you ministering to them and those who are just, it's tough for them not being there physically?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's another thing too. We're gonna have to focus a whole lot more on mental health, which is one thing the faith communities have not done a good job. sometimes there's been such a disconnect between faith communities and the scientific community and social sciences. And so the day in which we just tell people, you know, to get a scripture and a prayer, you know, that day is over. And so, and particularly, I think, and to add to your question, for us, when you had multiple deaths, and you have older people who can't see their relatives, you know, spending the holidays and can't enjoy family, right? What does that look like? And so for me, one of the things that I'm trying to propose for us is ways that we can do things in a small group setting, perhaps. Maybe that we can't do it in mass, but maybe in small groups. That maybe doing it through the small groups. Maybe in the interim, in lieu of having a mass gathering, we can do the small kind of church group kind of models. And then the expectation or the hope would be that the small group can provide that type of fellowship and koinonia that you talked about, and also give them a sense of connectivity while we're in the process of going back to a much larger context.